and the United States government is engaged in an active cover-up of the largest sex trafficking scandal and influence peddling scandal in the history of the United States, and Donald Trump is right at the center of it.
You just heard from Representative Melanie Stansbury, who serves on the House Oversight Committee, and she made those comments after she watched Ghislaine Maxwell plead the fifth again and again and again. And now Maxwell's attorney is saying that she's only going to talk if Trump grants her clemency. So I guess that her being transferred to a minimum security prison where she gets to play with puppies wasn't enough. The special treatment that she's already getting isn't special enough. But we all know that if Trump scratches her back, she'll scratch his by lying about the extent of his involvement with Jeffrey Epstein. But regardless if she chooses to spill the tea or not, Representative Stansbury is right to say that Trump is at the center of all of this, because some lawmakers have actually been given access to the full unredacted Epstein files, and their findings confirm Stansbury's claim beyond a shadow of a doubt. For example, Representative Jamie Raskin says that Trump's name came up more than 1 million times when he searched for it. And he also discovered a document that proves Trump lied about him ending his relationship with Epstein back in 2004.
Epstein's lawyers synopsized and quoted Trump as saying that that Jeffrey Epstein was not a member of his club at Mar-a-Lago, but he was a guest at Mar-a-Lago, and he had never been asked to leave. And that was redacted for some indeterminate, inscrutable reason. I know it seems to be at odds with some things that President Trump has been saying recently about how he had kicked Jeffrey Epstein out of his club or asked him to leave, and this was at least one report that appears to contradict it.
Yeah, that's quite the contradiction. But it gets worse, because in 2006, the police chief of Palm Beach County, Florida, claims Trump called the department to thank them for going after Jeffrey Epstein, saying, "Thank goodness you're stopping him. Everyone has known he's been doing this." And according to the FBI document, Trump told him on the call that people in New York knew Epstein was disgusting, and he said Epstein accomplished Ghislaine Maxwell was Epstein's operative, and said she is evil and to focus on her. And knowing what we now know, it makes these comments Trump made back in 2020 seem even more suspicious.
I just wish her well, frankly. I've met her numerous times over the years, especially since I lived in Palm Beach, and I guess they lived in Palm Beach, but I wish her well.
Interesting. Why would you wish her well when you think she's evil? That doesn't really make any sense, right? Now, MAGA dick riders are saying that the call between Trump and the Florida Police Department confirms that he's innocent, since he was relieved to see Epstein finally face accountability for the crimes that Trump knew about, but it actually proves the opposite. And I feel like they know that, but they're just trying to cover for the president that they support. Because at a minimum, it confirms that Trump was well aware of a sex trafficking ring and chose to do nothing about it. And this new document from a lawsuit that you're seeing on screen right now, which names Trump and multiple co-conspirators, some of which have been directly implicated in crimes, by the way, alleges that Trump did have knowledge of Epstein's desire for minor girls, which isn't necessarily surprising considering that he admitted such back in 2002 in an interview with New York Magazine, where he described Epstein as a terrific guy and said, "He's a lot of fun to be with. It is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side." And as the New Republic points out, that was around the same time that he sent Epstein that creepy birthday card where he says, "May every day be another wonderful secret." But at worst, it signaled Trump's intent to rat out his buddy only after he was caught in order to save his own ass, which is likely given the allegations from Stacey Williams, who claimed that Trump groped her in front of Jeffrey Epstein, and they both smiled at each other while he did that, as if they were playing some sort of sick and twisted game. And remember, from the last batch of Epstein files, we saw a sworn testimony where a victim alleges, under penalty of perjury, by the way, that Trump threatened to murder a victim's entire family if she exposed Epstein's sex crimes. So all signs point to Trump being a willing participant, not some horrified observer who is too afraid to speak out. If anything, it seems like Epstein and Maxwell were the ones who were too afraid to spill the beans on Donald Trump, at least based on what Epstein said to journalist Michael Wolff.
I urged Epstein, I said, you should release these pictures. I mean, if for no other reason, and Epstein was already in trouble and already a figure which people were, he was already demonized. I said, maybe this will even even help you. You can be on the side of right here. And I remember Epstein said, again, chilling at the time, he said, I may be a pervert, but I'm not crazy. And then he said, Trump is a man without any scruples.
In other words, even when Epstein had nothing to lose by naming names, he still wouldn't say what he knew about Donald Trump. And the same is now true for Ghislaine Maxwell, who had the same response when asked directly about Trump's involvement with their sex trafficking ring.
Have you ever socialized with Donald Trump in the presence of females under the age of 18?
Though I'd like to answer that question, at least today, I'm going to have to assert my 5th, 6th, and 14th Amendment rights, sir.
Are you aware of Donald Trump ever engaging in sexual activity with an individual introduced to him by you or Jeffrey Epstein?
I invoke my 5th Amendment right to silence.
That's pretty telling, especially since Trump is the one who repeatedly claimed before that there's no need to invoke the Fifth if you're innocent. But one can rationalize why Maxwell isn't going to want to speak, because if she does, then Trump has no reason to grant her clemency, and she's obviously holding what she knows about him over his head to get what she wants. But another thing we now have to consider is whether or not her safety actually hinges on whether or not she keeps quiet, because journalist Dominic Michael Trippi reports newly released Epstein documents reveal FBI agent purposely removed hard drive from jail video recording system, intentionally erasing all prison footage during the time of Epstein's death. And the document that he found, which is still available at the time that I record this video on the Justice Department website, states, blank advised that an FBI agent was the one who pulled out the DVR. Blank also advised that he knew that by replacing both hard drives, the system would be wiped, and that he advised personnel at MCC of that. So this is huge because it indicates that somebody at the FBI may have actually tampered with evidence. And prior to this, we knew from a video analysis conducted by a pre-Barry Weiss CBS News that someone in orange appeared to enter Epstein's cell the night of his death, which obviously points to foul play being the cause of his death, not suicide. And there's no evidence that Trump was directly involved or knew about the individual who may or may not have entered his cell, and he might have not known about the FBI agent that apparently tampered with security footage. But it is important to note that that was his FBI who did that. He was president at the time of Epstein's death. So I'm not alleging that Trump played a role in Epstein's death, but I'm also not dismissing the idea as absurd given what we now know. And in the event, hypothetically speaking, Trump did have Epstein killed, it wouldn't be his first murder because he is a mass murdering war criminal after all. But we still need more evidence regarding this particular potential murder to make that logical leap. And at risk of sounding conspiratorial, I will say that I don't think it's an insane thing to ask questions about. Like, it's not absurd these days to question Trump's involvement given his bizarre comments about Epstein's death. And I say this because in an interview with the Daily Beast, Michael Wolff shared a secondhand account of a conversation that somebody had with Donald Trump where he reacted to claims that he might have had Epstein killed, and Trump told this person that he didn't have Epstein killed. But when he was asked about whether or not he thinks Epstein was killed, Trump reportedly said, "A lot of people wanted him dead." Now, this obviously doesn't prove anything, it's hearsay. But if Trump did say this, the question is, who? What does he know? And why does he think a lot of people wanted him dead? I thought he was ignorant here and had no idea. Well, lately we're learning that that's definitely not the case. Our suspicions were right. But that's not all, because when Tucker Carlson asked Donald Trump point blank whether he thought that Epstein killed himself, Trump seemed to be genuinely caught off guard by the question and offered a completely different answer than his private one.
I read Barr's account of his time. He wrote a book about it,
Right.
His autobiography. And in it, he lies about Jeffrey Epstein's death. Clearly lies. Do you think Epstein killed himself sincerely?
I don't know. I will say that, he was a fixture in Palm Beach.
Yeah.
I don't know what Barr said about it either. I have no idea what he said. What did he say? He killed himself, probably?
He said he killed himself and that they were going to do this investigation. They never did the investigation. It's never been public.
Well,
and they hid it. And like, why are they doing that? And clearly Barr knew. But why would Bill Barr be covering up the death of Jeffrey Epstein?
Bill Barr didn't do an investigation on the election fraud either, okay? He said he did, and he pretended he did, but he didn't.
Do you think it's possible that Epstein was killed?
Oh, sure, it's possible. I mean, I don't really believe. I think he probably committed suicide. He had a life with, beautiful homes and beautiful everything, and he, all of a sudden, he's incarcerated and not doing very well. I would say that he did. But there are those people, there are many people, I think you're one of them, right? But a lot of people think that he was killed. He knew a lot on a lot of people.
He was killed.
So he knew a lot on a lot of people, which is similar to, but not exactly the same as him privately saying a lot of people wanted him dead. But this time he was quick to shoot down the idea that Epstein was murdered, which is... it's not the best look, given what we now know today. But keep in mind, we can only speculate. This is mere conjecture on my part. But after seeing everything that we saw in the last batch of Epstein files, I am no longer inclined to dismiss the thought of Trump killing Epstein as a conspiracy theory, because we have seen some crazy fucking shit that I never would have even conceived of before. But it's all real. And like the worst conspiracy theory, like the caricature that we envisioned in our minds of the ruling class being evil behind the scenes, ended up being true. Now, again, there's no evidence directly implicating Donald Trump here, but let's not pretend like he didn't stand to benefit from Epstein's death, seeing as how he comes up in the Epstein files more than 1 million times. But a motive is not the same as evidence. What we do know is that the FBI engaged in a potential cover-up of Epstein's death, and that may explain why both Patel and Bongino did this weird 180. And my thought at the time when I saw this interview that we're going to watch was, what did they see that made them change their mind so quickly like that? It couldn't be conclusive evidence because of the way that they're acting. And I'm no body language expert, but you can see that they were clearly rattled by what they saw, especially Dan Bongino.
You said Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide. People don't believe it.
Well, I mean, listen, they have a right to their opinion, but as someone who has worked as a public defender, as a prosecutor, who's been in that prison system, who's been in the Metropolitan Detention Center, who's been in segregated housing, you know a suicide when you see one, and that's what that was.
He killed himself. You want me to? I've seen the whole file. He killed himself.
Super convincing. But let's not forget that Pam Bondi also said that the missing minute of security footage that they released was the result of a glitch. So to go back to Representative Stanbury's comments about this being a cover-up, we now have confirmation that members of Trump's regime actively engaged in a cover-up, and we're only now beginning to see the scope of said cover-up and what they were willing to do, how far they were willing to go to keep the truth from getting out. Case in point, remember, FBI Director Kash Patel said this under oath.
Who, if anyone, did Epstein traffic these young women to besides himself?
Himself. There is no credible information. None. If there were, I would bring the case yesterday that he trafficked to other individuals. And the information we have, again, is limited.
So the answer is no one?
For the information that we have.
In the files?
In the case file.
Yeah, so we now know that that was him perjuring himself. And it was absurd on its face back then to say that there were no co-conspirators in the first place, because nobody is stupid enough to think that Epstein trafficked 1,000 victims to himself. But after getting a look at the unredacted Epstein files, Ro Khanna is now naming the powerful people involved that Patel claimed didn't exist.
Congressman Massey and I went to the Department of Justice to read the unredacted Epstein files. We spent about 2 hours there, and we learned that 70 to 80% of the files are still redacted. In fact, there were 6 wealthy, powerful men that the DOJ hid for no apparent reason. When Congressman Massey and I pointed this out to the Department of Justice, they acknowledged their mistake, and now they have revealed the identity of these 6 powerful men. These men are Salvatore Navora, Zorab Mikoladze, Leopig Leonor, Nicola Caputa, Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayem, CEO of Dubai Ports World, and billionaire businessman Leslie Wexner.
And keep in mind, that's just 6 co-conspirators. There were likely many more, and Ro Khanna said this as well. But for some reason, Patel decided to lie under oath to protect these men. And even though Thomas Massie doesn't use the word perjury in a CNN interview that he did, he essentially suggests that it is a stretch to assume that Patel was ignorant to all of the things that they're now seeing.
Does that testimony ring true to you still?
No, the FBI's own documents from 2019 list Leslie Wexner as a co-conspirator in a child sex trafficking case. So, you know, they've got some explaining to do.
Does that mean you think Kash Patel perjured himself?
You know, I thought when he said that, maybe the trick he's using in his mind is that, well, he's considering it prostitution, and maybe what they have is evidence of sex trafficking of people who weren't minors. But what we see tonight is the charge that Lex Wexner was a co-conspirator to was child sex trafficking, and it's on the FBI's own documents from 2019.
So he very clearly doesn't want to directly accuse Patel of committing perjury, but in a roundabout way, he's confirming that Patel did in fact lie under oath. And why wouldn't he? Because he probably felt emboldened to lie for Trump, because if he got busted for perjury, Trump would just pardon him. So there was really no reason to not lie on Donald Trump's behalf. And if that wasn't bad enough, they went out of their way to redact names of potential criminals to shield said criminals from culpability. Like this email where a redacted name tells Epstein that they enjoyed a torture video. Turns out that this was the Sultan that Ro Khanna just named. But if you're wondering why the Trump regime would protect this guy, well, as Tim Miller points out, Epstein's torture video pal is Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayem of the UAE, notably the same country that the president got $500 million investment from into his personal cryptocurrency. In other words, the Trump regime might have covered up literal torture done at the behest of an elite for pleasure, all to protect Donald Trump's pocketbook. But that explains one of many redactions that they made, because Massie says the email to Epstein about the littlest girl being a little naughty was likely sent by a woman, but her name was redacted because they were presumably blocking out all female names. We don't know for sure if they were trying to protect this particular female, but they were blocking out female names. And it doesn't matter what the reason was, because all of it is illegal. They cannot redact the names of the perpetrators of these crimes, and all of these redactions directly violate the law, as explained by Ro Khanna. But it appears as if the DOJ wasn't the main culprit behind said redactions.
Now, we just discovered 6 men in a 2-hour review. My guess is there are more of those people, and we are going to petition the Justice Department to release that. That could have been incompetence and a cover-up. The broader cover-up, though, that I'm concerned about is the scrubbing that took place in March in the FBI files, where all of this redacted information was then sent to the Justice Department. I think U.S. attorneys looked at it in good faith, but they were looking at documents that were already redacted. So when I said to the Justice Department person, who was very nice, helping me search through the documents, I said, why are these redacted? He said, well, sir, we got them this way. So we just are putting them up in the form we got them. And that is the big issue that needs to be addressed.
So it's starting to make more sense to me why Dan Bongino wanted to ditch the FBI as soon as possible, because he didn't want to be there when the entire house of cards came tumbling down. Sure, Pam Bondi also lied, but Kash Patel, perhaps more than anyone else, bent over backwards to protect the elites that were implicated in the Epstein files. And again, we still haven't even seen the rest of the Epstein files yet. Most of them we have not seen, but aside from Massie and Khanna, other lawmakers did see them, and their immediate reactions were very telling. Like, you would think that they saw a ghost.
Just wanted to ask you, have you had a chance to review any of the unredacted files over at the DOJ, the Epstein files?
I did.
You did?
Yeah, I just came from there.
What can you tell us?
There's a bunch of sick fucks.
Well, initially, my reaction to all this was, I don't care. I don't know what the big deal is. But now, I see what the big deal is.
Any reaction on what you've seen so far?
I think that there's folks who are definitely implicated and co-conspirators. And, I don't think everyone there that was talking about underage girls being trafficked are victims.
Got it. And do you support any clemency for Ghislaine Maxwell? She was saying that she
I
was...
do not.
Okay.
I think Ghislaine Maxwell should get more time, and she should definitely be in a harsher prison than what she's in. It's absolutely disgusting.
My God. Listen, we have a right to know what they saw. Nonetheless, I'm afraid of what we're all going to see, because there's so much more that we still don't know, and we already know quite a bit. In that last batch, there was talk of bodies being buried. There was talk of torture. There was admissions of pedophilia, pretty explicitly so. And there was talk of how to get rid of poor people as a whole with Bill Gates, as well as discussions between Epstein and Peter Thiel about how they basically benefit from the collapse of civilization, not to mention a conversation about how foreign intervention is an effective distraction from domestic strife. And we're still learning more from that batch. Epstein was also asked who the gynecologist was that he sends his victims to, which is just so nauseating. He also engaged in blackmail and was almost certainly an intelligence asset for Israel and possibly other governments. And aside from Trump, more members of his regime were recently exposed in that last batch of files, including Elon Musk and also Howard Lutnick, who seemed genuinely anxious, might I add, when he was forced to admit that he was caught lying.
I think you understand the root of concern here. It's the way you described very emphatically your first encounter with him in his apartment, said you were disgusted, would never have any contact with him again.
I say to him, massage table in the middle of your house? How often do you have a massage? And he says, every day. And then he gets weirdly close to me. Ooh. And he says, and the right kind of massage. Ooh. Now my wife is standing here. So she looks at me and I look at her and we say, I'm sorry, we have to go. And we left. And in the 6 or 8 steps it takes to get from his house to my house, my wife and I decided that I will never be in the room with that disgusting person ever again.
Did you, in fact, make the visit to Jeffrey Epstein's private island?
I did have lunch with him as I was on a boat going across on a family vacation. My wife was with me, as were my 4 children and nannies. I had another couple they were there as well with their children, and we had lunch on the island. That is true, for an hour, and we left with all of my children, with my nannies and my wife, all together. We were on family vacation. We were not apart. To suggest there was anything untoward about that in 2012, I don't recall why we did it, but...
So he claims that when he was neighbors with Epstein, all it took was one visit to his house to realize, oh, this guy's a gigantic creep. But behind the scenes, he was chumming it up with him. He was emailing Epstein plans to go to his island and oddly listing the ages of his children, which is a chilling email to read. So he got caught red-handed, and Senator Merkley pointed out how you can hear in his voice how nervous he was.
And I can hear the angst in your voice over the Epstein files.
And you could hear that same angst in Trump's voice whenever he talks about the Epstein files, or at least that was the case. Now he's just angry whenever it comes up for obvious reasons, but he was always very coy and squirrely whenever Epstein's name was brought up, and, automatically felt the need to defend himself. And I just feel like they all have the same demeanor, and it's the demeanor that tells you that they're guilty without telling you they're guilty, if you know what I mean. But I don't know why any of them are nervous in the first place, because even though the criminality that has been uncovered in the Epstein files is bringing down elites throughout the world, there still hasn't been any real accountability here in the United States. And Roe kind of made this point.
This is bringing down the British government. It may bring down the British monarchy. It's bringing down countries and the elites across the country. What are we doing here in the United States to stand up to the Epstein class? I mean, we've got a commerce secretary who's all over the Epstein files. Where's the outrage? Where's the outrage at the billionaires in Silicon Valley, in finance, in Hollywood, the going to Epstein's island? We need moral accountability in the United States, just like they're having in so many other countries around the world.
And to drive home his point, Representative Stansbury pointed out that there's already been investigations and consequences in some cases for elites in 9 other countries over the Epstein files, including the UK, Norway, Sweden, Slovakia, France, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and Ireland. But the one conspicuous exception is the United States of America, even though the U.S. dictator is at the very center of this conspiracy, as she put it at the start of this video. And if it were any other leader in any other country, we all know Trump would have been forced to resign after the first batch of files. But even after learning about him being named 1 million times, does anyone expect even a shred of accountability? Calls for him to resign, impeachment, anything? Of course not. In fact, Caroline Livet already said that we're moving on in response to the latest allegations. In a just world, this would have already brought down the Trump regime, but we don't live in a just world. We live in a parody of reality where the Epstein class gets to commit the worst crimes imaginable for fun and get away with it.